Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. For everybody just tuning in, this is Ryan Wallner. Ryan has done far more of these than I have. We were joking around. I think that I've actually learned anything good that comes out of this from being on your podcast.
We'd love to have you back. I think it's been too long at this point anyway.
Take you up on that invite anytime. So Ryan is the founder of the Kubernetes Bytes podcast. That's actually where I first started following him back when I was on the Kubernetes team. His work was very, very well known around my old team. Most recently, Ryan, after a brief stint in an intermezzo stint at Dell, Ryan was over at Portworx right now. The day job we could talk about a little bit later, but the Kubernetes Bytes podcast, if nobody's heard it, by the way, the KubeCon North America roundup was absolutely fantastic. Before that, the Tony Knopp interview I thought was really, really, really good. You had like 3 or 4 others, I think, just in the last couple of months that really hit my radar screen. So a huge thank you and a huge shout out. I follow his stuff.
I appreciate that, Kyle. Yeah, we have a lot of fun. My co-host Bob and Shaw and I are both from the Boston area, so that's how that show. We've been doing it about 3 years now, and I joke pretty often about what's the last thing I did every 2 weeks for 3 years, and it's hard to come up with answers for that. So in podcast world, it's hard work staying consistent that way. I'll say the least.
I'd love to tie our conversation today back to your views on Kubernetes, and at the end, I'd love to come to what do you think is the future here of Kube. But I know that first step we want to talk a little bit about. I think the title is what even is AIOps. You have in the circles that you run in, you get the luxury and the privilege of having a lot of filtered information about this. And why don't we just open it there? To you, what is AIOps?
Yeah, it's funny. I think if you're in this industry long enough, you start to realize that we come up with new terms every year. And in the last, decade, most of them or a lot of them have the word ops tied to it. DevOps being the ones I think a lot of people know, and now AIOps being a newer one. But there's a lot in that space, right? So, I think the conversation has to start with, well, what do we mean by ops when we say AIOps? And in the general sort of if you look this term up, you'll find that ops generally, means we're talking about IT operations. And that's a loaded thing to talk about because IT operations can be, really anything from managing infrastructure to handling tickets to monitoring applications in production. If you're part of the network operations center, if they still have those these days, I'm sure they do. That is IT operations. And really, AIOps to me is how we're applying modern artificial intelligence to help us basically be better at handling and performing our jobs in IT operations, whether that's artificial intelligence helping with automation, or if it's artificial intelligence having us become decision makers through the data we're giving it and those kind of things. I'm probably, going a little too fast into what does it mean and what parts of the puzzle there are, but long-winded answer to say AIOps is really, artificial intelligence applied to traditional IT operations. I'll put it that way.
I think it's a good first spot because, for me, we were just talking about this before we went live. Whenever I see the word AIOps, I immediately think it means alert deduplication. And so I love to kind of get, I think your view is that, hey, this term actually is a much broader term and should be used as a much broader term rather than called a Gartner Magic Quadrant that includes, about 2 companies.
Yeah. Alert deduplication is definitely part of it, I would say. The way I've seen this talked about, if you start to look at the AIOps space, is noise reduction, right? You'll see that term thrown around and you might be asking, well, what does that mean? Noise can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, especially depending on where you work. But I think to me, noise reduction is in that sense more in line with the alert deduplication or alert fatigue, right? So if you're in IT operations, you might have a lot of different data sources where you get things like logs and metrics and various other things to perform sort of your overall observability strategy. And while that is a lot to kind of take on, many of those tools that enable you to do that, often you set, either a platform helps you set these, or you have particular alerts which you care about. It might be performance related, load related, all these types of things. But it winds up being that a lot of these alerts or events are being sent your way, and some of them might be duplications of each other, or they might necessarily not mean anything. So AIOps does have a whole field where it plays in helping sort of categorize all this noise into something more parsable by a human, right? Making us a little more efficient by being sort of the thing in between all that noise and how we make actionable decisions. That's where I think AIOps really starts to be a little bit of an eye-opener, because if you think about having to do all these things manually, meaning retroactively look at all these alerts and try to make define some meaning out of it, you might find what you care about after it's a little too late, right? And I know I mentioned this a little bit before we started this stream, but the whole idea of like being proactive versus reactive, I think, is an important conversation when talking about just generally like how does AIOps differ from things like event deduplication, or even what we've already been doing in IT analytics or application performance monitoring, because these things are fields in which we've been performing related sort of contexts without AI, until now, I would say.
Yeah. Now you said something to me that kind of caught my ear there. You said, hey, if you think of ops as a great big, signal to noise problem, or I hear people say a lot, it's like, the day job, it's like finding the needle in the haystack over and over and over and over again. And then how do you engineer systems so that the haystack is smaller? It does strike me that the way that you frame this, like, hey, this is a data how can we glean insights from these huge floods of data? This seems like an area that's primed for modern AI. I don't know. I mean, where in this landscape do you think like modern AI, specifically LLMs here, right? Or take it whichever direction you want. But where in this landscape do you think you'll see modern AI have the real big wins first?
Yeah. And this answer might be different depending on who you're asking it to, but I'll answer it in sort of my background and opinion.
The future, it's what's your opinion?
Yeah, exactly. So, the other day I was reading an article that framed the way we're working with LLMs and ML in general, or AI and AI ops in general, in a specific way. And I want to bring it up here because I thought it was neat. Which was that someone categorized, typically if you're trying to understand AI, you're like, well, AI is the bigger umbrella. Then you have machine learning as sort of the next bubble inside of that. And then deep learning is sort of, the thing that's solving more complex problem with neural networks. But someone explained that ML ops, right, the operations around machine learning pipelines, is DevOps for ML. So ML ops is DevOps for ML, and AI ops is ML for DevOps. Now, I really like this because to answer your question a little bit, is I think there's a modern approach to how we're using AI ops to help us in the journey we've kind of already been going on in the DevOps space for a lot longer. Meaning, how can we apply AI ops to how we're already thinking about the software development lifecycle in the DevOps world? Because maintenance observability, monitoring, all those things are big parts of the feedback loop we talk about in sort of the DevOps lifecycle. So, to me, I think there's a lot of pain points that organizations can really probably point to because they've been doing things a certain way for a while, and now they're saying, well, how can I utilize AIOps inside of what I've already been doing to help those pain points. And so, I guess the short answer is I think the wins are going to be applying it to problems we already had, especially in sort of that ops side of things when it comes to the DevOps world already.
Would you ever double clicking on that? So at least what I heard, I mean, then look, very selfishly, like as a founder who's using AI for, our claim is like build automation, 100x faster than traditional approaches to building automation. When you started saying like, hey, I think the big wins here are going to be AI to streamline work that we currently do today.
Yeah.
By hand. I'm just curious to double click on if you'd be up for double clicking on that a bit.
Yeah, this is more tailored to sort of like, what are those things that are still requiring manual interpretation by humans, right? So in sort of the whole DevOps space, we've come up with ways to make our lives more efficient so that we can better QA software. We can deploy and manage infrastructure and keep it up to date in an automated way with tools like GitOps or Ansible or Puppet or those things over the years, right? We've made ourselves a little more efficient at using these tools, and once they're sort of deployed, applications are deployed, we still have the need to kind of make sure that we're ingesting as much information about that thing to make sure we're taking an analytical approach about making sure the uptime is the way we want it. The fact that we're doing root cause analysis in the most efficient way, and as someone who still does a lot of RCAing in some platforms, that's one aspect, I think, especially in the Kubernetes space, right? That a lot of us that may be in the Kubernetes space or in just the general container ecosystem space can say there's a lot of data coming at us real fast, and there's entire companies that are doing well that ingest all that data, and they probably have an AIOps solution for that as well. But I think that's where if you were to just kind of think about the raw sort of information that an SRE, for instance, or even someone in that is kind of keeping these things performing well or making sure they're being used in a way that they really can take these tools in the AIOps landscape and immediately start to use them. And it's not just the sort of information overload that we have. I think it's overall the complexity that we keep adding, right? This entire Kubernetes ecosystem has a lot of complexity and layers when you start thinking about all the different things like security or compliance or networking or storage or all these monitoring and logging and metrics. And we've done entire multi podcast sessions on Kubernetes Bytes just on kind of breaking those things down. I think that's where when I say in the DevOps space is that today we have pain points like those that you're starting to see these AIOps tools become something that's sort of an obvious next step because there's a need, there's a pain point for existing organizations doing those things.
Yeah, I mean, sorry. When you say, hey, I still find myself doing probably more RCA in the day job than one would expect. when you say there's a pain point, I'm curious to see if you zoom in, like what are the types of organizations they have in mind? Like if you could get into specifics, what's like the archetypal organization? What's the like day in the, what's the day in the life of the person where you think these AI tools are going to have the most impact the earliest?
Yeah, so tying back the DevOps piece of it, I realized thinking through where AIOps sort of applies the most. I do feel that it's sort of, if you took sort of a scale in the DevOps space, right, that it's more applicable to the ops side of things, the IT operations that we're talking about, because tools that developers use that have AI aren't necessarily classified the same as how I've seen, I'll put it, AIOps talked about, especially when you think about sort of like the pillars that are often associated with AIOps, which is, right, sort of like observation. How do you kind of process or engage with that data and how you act upon it? And I feel like a lot of that is tailored towards organizations that, and this can definitely apply across various types. I don't think there's a specific vertical I'm talking about here, but just generally DevOps organizations that are more mature in the sense that, they're continually putting out applications. They have a well thought out monitoring solution. They have teams that are, part of those sort of feedback loops and sort of monitoring tooling that are actively engaging with that, but are probably looking for a way to either they're probably having a problem where they're saying, well, I wish I had 4 more, Susans or 4 more Jimmys who are really good at what they do, because there's so much to be done or so much to tackle. I think if they're hitting that pain point of like, there's we need more people, or we need to become more efficient because we're always basically feeling like we're underwater with how we're keeping applications healthy or doing these types of workflows, then maybe I think that's probably a really good place to start for like, here's a perfect example of maybe how AIOps solution or tool applied to that specific problem that is complex or data rich can be used, right? So I think it really goes back to like, you're probably mature and you're feeling those pain points daily or at least weekly.
I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that you're a relatively sophisticated team that doesn't have quite enough people. Which seems
there's probably a lot of people listening to this being like, well, I fall into that category, or maybe we all feel that with these days. But I feel like it's a common theme.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, especially, I don't know what you think, but I think the zeitgeist to some of this has changed quite a bit over the last year, where, at least, in my day job at RunWhen, when we were first kind of starting to market what we have is like AI engineering assistants. So many people would say, wait, so is AI going to take my job? Is AI going to take my job? Right. I feel like that fear is kind of going away, and people are like, no, AI is not going to take my job.
Yeah.
But AI is AI just going to become a really, really important, like, are AI tools going to become a really important part of my toolkit? I mean,
yeah.
I've seen a fair amount of code for RunWhen, and I had to take a flight a couple of weeks ago, and that meant that I had very limited or spotty internet connectivity, and the idea of coding without the AI coding assistants that I use, it was painful. It was awful. I'm like, oh my God, this feels like back in college, like writing assembly language. I mean, this is just like, it's so slow. And I think that we're approaching very, very, very rapidly approaching like the DevOps professional equivalent of it, where the job without these awesome tools like sucks.
Yeah.
My own crystal ball.
Yeah, I tend to agree, right? A lot of times new technology, and this is just history repeating itself, right? If you were the guy that a farmer, paid to bring his, tools up a hill, and then the the basic tools of like the wheel came along, you'd be like, wow, that wheel's going to take my job. Well, it's sort of like a really dumbed down version of the same problem where we're always kind of fearful of new things right at first, because I think just as a society we're skeptical, especially with something that's supposed to mimic us in general. But I think that fear has subsided a little bit, because we're realizing how useful it actually is, meaning, wow, we were wrong a little bit about how useful this tool is to my arsenal. But B, we're realizing that AI is not necessarily all it's cracked up to be in terms of mimicking us to it perfectly, right? We know that there's problems still, and usually if you're if you're interacting with either it's a coding assistant or some chatbot or even some other tool making predictions, you still have to do some level of interpretation, right? I think fully autonomous AI systems that can do everything without you, we're very far away from that.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
have a friend, I love the way that he put it. He's like, these AI systems, they're kind of like savant interns. And if you like give the problem just right, then the savant intern is going to do amazing work. And like, you're probably not going to get replaced by the savant intern anytime soon. But your ability to like frame the work for the savant intern, like, hey, you see people who are really good at that, and you see people who are really bad at that. And I've had plenty of people do horrible jobs of managing interns, and everybody kind of knew it by the end of the summer. I did just want to flag, Maggie just flagged me saying, hey, somebody who's listening actually just DM'd her, and she put a comment in she put a question in the comments for us. The person's question was, hey, if an organization is starting an AIOps initiative, so in the broad definition, I'm kind of assuming, hey, they're not using AI in any of their DevOps tooling yet. Is it your opinion, your experience, is it generally, do people start with like long-term planning and like hiring like the right person for whom this will be their job? Or is it, hey, they pick a tool and then they start building their team, their people and processes around the tool?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And it like all good questions, the answer is it depends. But I want to say that I've heard, at least anecdotally, more often it's, what type of tooling do I already have? Especially because, applying AI to processes is typically, like you described just before, is an additional tool to an arsenal. So having hiring in the expertise does help if you're, starting from scratch and maybe you don't have the slightest idea of, having that expertise on a part of a team. But I think if you're existing tooling, like say you have an existing, monitoring or logging ingestion tool that already is providing you with some, level of dashboarding and sort of alerting and those kind of things. Do they have a solution that you could try, right? And I think this is where finding hey, I have an existing tool that maybe has this thing I can try in the AIOps land. And I also identify that this is a pain point I'm having on my team. Maybe it's RCA like we talked about before, or maybe it's event deduplication, or maybe it's various other things. But can I kind of apply this or test it out to see if we become more efficient, right? How can this tool make a difference? So I think to some degree, you have to consider the existing tooling that's there to see if it, you have a process that you could, start with.
We just had another question come in, if it's okay. I mean, I think we should both answer it. Let me answer it from the RunWhen side, because can we have a real-time use case of AIOps as defined by like AI tooling, called modern AI tooling within DevOps teams? At least from our end, I mean, I can talk about how our customers are using it. Like for us, when we actually use our internal, to your point, it's root cause analysis, like root cause analysis, root cause analysis, root cause analysis. How long does it take one of our folks to say, type in like, hey, is our backend public API ingress down? they type that in and they can get a pretty reliable answer like, no, that's not down, but it's one of these 14 microservices that's currently down, and here's why. Like for us, the ability to do that in 30 seconds versus the ability to do that in like an hour, like that's a big difference. And that's exactly the way that we use our tool for today. And even when we don't have coverage, like being able to say, hey, what's down? And I can say, well, I just did a basic health check of all 14 of your major microservices, like, and all of those seem to be fine, but I just did storage check across your 3 databases, and the write-ahead log and the partition of database A is actually nearing full. So you're probably seeing some weirdness there. So like, frankly, like AI for, root cause analysis, like we're seeing that, we use it every day. Like we're seeing that work today. There's also, since we do a lot of workflow automation, there's this kind of quirky use case that we have that we just shaved like $12,000 a month off of our cloud bills by grabbing logs out of Kubernetes pods. Every time there's a failed test, every time there's an alert, certainly every time like a developer says like, hey, are there any stack traces in these logs? And then we just paste the stack traces into tickets. It sounds really mundane, but frankly, like it would be kind of a pain to do that well and with like static automation, and yet with like a little bit of AI work, it actually works like a charm. And we use it, I mean, we save 12 grand a month. Like for a company our size, that's actually pretty significant. I mean, across our customers, there's an awful lot of people on call who don't have deep knowledge of the systems that they're on call for, either because they themselves are very junior, and we have a couple of cases like outsourced, like L0 support. And then we have some cases where you have like really senior SREs, but because of like cost cutting, whatever it is, a senior SRE is covering a span of systems that is just absolutely gigantic. There's no prayer that the senior SRE could be really deep in the gigantic breadth of stuff that they have to cover. And so the ability for them to be able to say like, hey, these 48 alerts, just like do what I would do next if I were to read all of our run books and be like a reasonable like L2, L3 expert in all these systems, run it all right now and flag any issues that need my review. That's a big use case. I think that's actually really important, because I think the future of on-call has to be a fairly small number covering like a huge broad swath of systems, massively aided by a ton of automation. And to make all that work, you're gonna have to have a lot of AI. So that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you're seeing.
Yeah, I was gonna double click and say, the added benefit there of that use case is the complex IT infrastructure thing, right? So knowledge base, right? It's really hard to keep up and keep really great quality engineers who know all of this stuff. And I've, you described it already, so I won't repeat it, but that's often overlooked, right? You can have someone very junior make an impact really quickly. And at the end of the day, right, you're trying to detect these incidents as fast as you can and recover from them as fast as you can. And ultimately, like we've seen, those detection rates and recovery rates kind of go down when you have these tools that are able to kind of interact with you and have more knowledge than you do that you can kind of like interact with.
There's also this kind of quirky one. I mean, we're seeing it, and I'm not sure if there's going to be like business there or not. But like the developer service desk, it sounds kind of funny, but like platform teams just get swamped by developers. Oh, Kubernetes is down. Kubernetes is not down. Oh, Google is down. Google's not down. Amazon's not down. Something is down, but it's not Kubernetes, and it's not Amazon, and it's not Google, and it's not the network. Something is down. But we've all been on teams where there's a developer like that, and then suddenly you lose like a really strong person who's got to help that person out for 3 or 4 hours trying to figure out exactly what is down. And it sounds funny, but like I don't know if we keep on seeing interest there, and we keep on seeing people like have that problem and want us to come in as a vendor and be part of the solution. I don't know. I'm curious it seems like a problem. I don't know if it's a problem that can be turned into a business.
That's a good one. I haven't actually seen that one, but I bet you, or heard it described that way, I should say. But I bet you there's groups of people at every company that probably act as the developer service desk to a certain degree, right? These are probably often the people who have been there the longest. have the tribal knowledge, right? That like, hey, I just joined, but like, how do I do this? Or like, why can't I access this? Or those kind of things, right? I could see it being an interesting use case inside of companies for sure.
We had one team where actually across 6 people on their platform team, they said it's actually a rotating on-call responsibility. They have a dev-facing on-call rotation, and they're like, it's actually the worst. So that's the biggest burnout rotation that we've got. So I don't know, more on that. Like I think I'll probably know a lot more over the next couple of quarters, but yeah, to the day job. To bring it back to Kubernetes though for 1 second, actually, and I know that I was kind of hoping to end on this. I have this thesis, from your night job and my prior day job that was kind of to me an integral story for me, the genesis of RunWhen. Towards the end, I had a couple people come back saying, hey, we think that actually running our applications on Kubernetes is actually all in a lot more expensive for us than running them on VMs. And I remember like my heart sank. We have like 600 developers like working on all kinds of nights and weekends to try to make this better, faster, cheaper. And Kubernetes is really, 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 really complicated. And when you double click on why, you're like, well, like for like, the cloud costs of running the same app go down by about like somewhere between like 30 and 50%. And it's like, it was hard to find cases where that didn't happen. Like almost always the cloud cost of running something on VMs, all in compute, network storage, all the fixins. But the operational cost, sometimes went down, sometimes went flat, but a lot of times went up. And I did think that actually amazing operational tooling could be the difference between Kubernetes being something that's still like for advanced users, or the Kubernetes being like an unclear business case, but a moment of passion, to Kubernetes being like the no-brainer way that every single workload in the world should be run. And the big difference was how can we make awesome operational tools? What do you think?
Yeah, I still subscribe to the notion that, everything should not necessarily run on Kubernetes. And I'm willing to be proven wrong, right? I know it's sort of the direction that everything is going to be that way, but, we're seeing an immense amount of interest in sort of the whole modern virtualization approach with Kubernetes sort of being the data center operating system to a certain degree that can do both, run virtual machines and containers. Well, why do we care? Because people still want to run things in virtual machines, and it may be applicable to that use case. So I'm still, I still subscribe to the fact that it really, you have to look hard at sort of what your use case is. Does Kubernetes make sense to you? And yeah, of course, operational tooling will 100% make a difference, right? In sort of how you can plan for the future and architecturally. You can take something that's a really good idea and use it in a really bad way. Is the reality of a lot of that conversation. So yeah, I think operational tooling does make a difference, but you still have to make sure you're looking at the problem as what applies to you, rather than we're just going to put it on Kubernetes because that's the way the world is going.
I just kind of liked it because I was always coming from networking myself, where like when you're in networking, you're kind of really you're kind of either ankle deep or neck deep, and there's really not that much for anybody in the middle. To efficiently operate Kubernetes, you really have to know quite a bit about networking, compute, and storage. And that to me made it kind of the perfect case where AIOps should start. Because if you take any one case where there's both the need, like a human can't do this without a jetpack, and the opportunity that like a human with a jetpack can have superpowers. I think to me, this is that case. A human with a jetpack can cover network, compute, and storage in depth, and when they can run Kubernetes like a champ and see kind of the magic that happens when you see it when this thing is really, really well run.
Yeah, and I sort of have a theory that say you're certified from the CNCF. Maybe you're a CK or CKS and CKAD, right? You have these certifications. I bet you could use an AIOps tool that interacts with a Kubernetes system, even as a bigger superpower, because you know sort of more about what it's responding to you about. You know how to send prompts to interact with it a little better, right? So there's still so much value outside of it, but I completely agree, right? Some jetpacks may be more powerful than others.
The same argument getting made for these AI coding assistants, and we see it. Like the top coders' productivity goes up with an AI coding assistant far more than the bottom quartile coders.
Yeah.
And so I think to your point, like if somebody's already like on, at the high end of the expert stack, then these things are an even bigger jetpack. We're at time, man.
Yeah, it goes quick, doesn't it?
All right, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. One last question, actually, that I swore to myself I would ask everybody because I got asked and I loved it. If you were going to give any advice, any career advice, really, to your younger self, what would it be?
Yeah, it's quite good timing because I just did an internal panel at my day job that was career advice oriented. And one of the things that resonated with those who watched that is sort of my response around being comfortable, being uncomfortable, being vulnerable, right, in your career, which is, not everybody thinks about sort of the EQ opportunity necessarily in your career, but I think this lends itself. If you're okay being uncomfortable and vulnerable, you'll be much more willing to learn something new. And learning something new, as I am, even in this AI space, and I'm very new to all of it. This is where I think you'll thrive and meet new people and form those relationships and learn new skills if you're willing to be a little more uncomfortable. So that's my advice.
I like that a lot. If you're willing to be uncomfortable and vulnerable, you'll learn faster. That's cool. Hey, Ryan, thank you so much. Hey, for everybody tuning in, thanks a ton for letting us go a little bit over. I love these conversations. You can tell that I really like the conversation. We'll go a little bit over time. We have another one just in scheduling in February. We will. Maggie is confirming the guest literally as we speak, and we will put that up shortly. Before then, if you get the chance, tune into the Kubernetes Bytes podcast. Like really, if you want to see what Kubernetes looks like from the inside, the community and the technology, and like what's really, really, really interesting, check out Ryan and Bobbin's podcast. It's great.
Thank you.